Greetings and welcome. We are in Senior English B. And we're now going to turn for just a few moments and pay some attention to the work of three really influential poets. Now, these poets, though, are particular to a certain time in history. We are now going to talk about three poets, and I'm with you now on in your hymnal 1272, 1273. We're going to look at three poets who are deeply impressed by and affected by the experience of war. The 20th century begins with unbelievable high optimism. That's where you want to begin in your notes. Unbelievable high optimism. Science is going to solve all of our problems. The world of the 20th century is going to be amazing in every way. And then 1914 and the Great War happens. And of course, years later, the Second World War would influence so much of the thinking of people in the 20th century. Let's go ahead and put it in your notes right away. There is this experience of the loss of optimism that will inform so much of the world of the 20th century. Everything's going to be great, and then this horrific war happens. Ostensibly, there's kind of two responses to the war. Let's not be too shocked by this, but nonetheless write it down. One, there is going to be the patriotic response. War is necessary, and young men, and sometimes women, of course, in those wars, very much women as well as men, gain honor and recognition through war. Acts of aggression must be stopped, and therefore heroes are made of patriots. All right? There's another view, though. And the second view is, what a more pessimistic view, what a waste of human life, human existence. All of these people dying, and for what? Let's take a look at three poems that are going to kind of maybe play this game, and let's decide which one of those two perspectives will be the one that's being held by each of our poets. We're going to begin with Rupert Brooke's poem, The Soldier. Take a look at 1275 real quickly and some of the background information. There are your dates, of course, the 4 years that changed the world, 1914 to 1918. Pitted Great Britain, France, Russia, Germany, Japan, Italy, and later the United States, the Allies, against Germany, Austria, Hungary, Turkey, the Central Powers. The war was fought not only in Europe but also in regions like Middle East, Asia Minor. Typical of this conflict, especially in Western Europe, was trench warfare. You want to put that term in your notes. What is trench warfare? What do we even know about that? Do you know what that means? What is that all about, Mr. Schaefer? What is that? Trench warfare? They what? Dig down under the ground, and you live down in these trenches, right? And then you put ladders up to climb out of the trenches. You then fight. I don't understand. Well, what's up with the trench? Like, why do you got to build a trench? It's for what? You got it. It's for security and for protection. Of course, we know that the experience of being in those trenches was really, really horrid and wretched, right? Terrible kinds of things happening in the trenches, right? Armies faced each other in defensive trenches protected by barbed wire. Periodically, one army would attack another in the face of machine gun and artillery fire. Such warfare and the illnesses resulting from life in filthy trenches led to a total loss of, are you ready for this? In 4 years, look at the number, 8.5 million soldiers. Now, in an age in which we can play video games where lots and lots of guys die, who of course have machine guns, numbers for us start to become somehow insignificant until we really start to think about it. In 4 years, 8.5 million people died. By the way, if you want to do some quick mathematics to blow your mind, do 365, number of days in a year, times 4. And then take the number 8.5 million and ask, how many people a day die? If you're talking about that number of people dying, 365 times 4, of course, is number of days that war happens, right? And you're talking 8.5 million people And of course, a number like that becomes, how about it, Brian? What is the mathematics on that? You're trying to figure it out. What is that?
5,821 people a day.
That's, if you talk about Worland is 5,000 people, which it is, right? You're talking about for 4 straight years, every day a Worland dies. The entire, whoa, right? This is why I've often said, playing video games is all fine and good, but it can in some ways not give us a real sense of what war is all about. What is war all about? Lots and lots of people dying. And in the First World War, this is just an unbelievable number of people. 5,000 people every day dying for 4 years. Lots and lots, of course, people back home obviously affected by these losses. It forever changes the way people think about war. And yet, there are poets who will have some kind of optimistic, patriotic view of the value of this kind of death and destruction. Take a look at Rupert Brooke's poem, The Soldier. It becomes a very, very famous poem, a statement of patriotism. If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. There shall be in that rich earth a richer dust concealed, a dust whom England bore, shaped, made aware, gave once her flowers to love, her ways to roam, a body of England's, breathing English air, washed by the rivers, blessed by sons of home. And think, this heart, all evils shed away. A pulse in the eternal mind no less gives somewhere back the thoughts by England given. Her sights and sounds, dreams happy as her day, and laughter learnt of friends and gentleness, and hearts at peace under an English heaven. Now, let's look at this poem, first of all, from 2b. Jot it down. Notice there's 2 stanzas to this poem. We're going to ask, what happens in the first stanza, what happens in the second stanza, and how's it going to work together? Notice the opening line. He says, who's the he? Who speaks in this poem? Who's the speaker in the poem? You got it. Obviously the title. A soldier, right? Notice it isn't a soldier, though. It's the soldier. A single soldier that will have a voice. And he says what in the opening lines? If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. Whoa, 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 what does that mean? So in other words, he says, if I die in France in some small place on the battlefield, wherever it is I fall, that place is forever England. I don't get it. How's that even work? What are you talking about? How is it possible that that place is forever England? What does he say? When I die, I don't die as an individual. I die as a piece of what? A piece of England. Right. Now, this is a pure patriotic statement, isn't it? In other words, why is it the soldier says he must die? He dies for his country, for his nation. And he says about that, there shall be in that rich earth a richer dust concealed, a dust whom England bore, shaped, made aware, gave once her flowers to love, her ways to roam. Now this is an interesting question, Mr. Hernandez, and it runs something like this. If you live in a country that raises you, educates you, so you didn't have to pay to come to Worland High for 3 or 4 years, other than pay and, I suppose, the anguish of having to endure coursework and homework, right? But you didn't have to pay. Your country raises you, takes care of you, provides for you, and then you become 20 years old. Do you have an obligation to die for that country if that country goes to war? In other words, do you owe the country back your life for the fact that you were raised in that country? What would the speaker of this poem say? You bet you do. You bet you do. But then he says something interesting in the second stanza when he says, and think this heart all evils shed away. In other words, what does he say about having to die for his country? Is he going to feel bad about that? No. Notice he says there's a reason. A pulse in the eternal mind no less gives somewhere back the thoughts by England given. In other words, England gave me my pulse. That is to say, metaphorically, gave me what? My life, right? Gave me my life. Gave me sights, sounds, dreams happy as her day, laughter learnt of friends, gentleness, and hearts at peace under an English heaven. Jot down in your notes before we move on to the next poem, how is it possible this poem could have somehow given some comfort to people back home who knew that their son died in the war? Could they imagine maybe hearing their own son's voice through this speaker to say, don't be sad for me, don't be upset for me, my death was worth it. Death at 5,000 a day for 4 years? Whoa! That's a lot of people to die. Now remember, we're talking about not just death on one side of the battle lines, but on the other side of the battle lines as well, right? There's another view of the war. Let's take a look at the one on page 1276. This one is called Wirers. And your side or your footnote there will tell you these are soldiers who were responsible for repairing barbed wire fences that protected the trenches during the Great War. It's called the Great War still today in England, the First World War. Because the trenches were vulnerable to attack. Somebody could sneak up, drop an explosive in the trench. There's nowhere for the explosive to go other than right there in the trench. You could kill a large number of people by dropping one explosive into that trench, which meant by definition you had to protect the trenches. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, they would put up these large numbers. You can see the pictures there on page 1276. Large numbers of real barbed wire fences. And therefore the only way to get to the trench was to go either under or over or through those barbed wire fences. And so what would happen is that under cover of night, there would be guys sent out with clippers, and they would cut holes in this barbed wire fences, and then, of course, somebody could sneak through, drop down, right? Can you imagine going to sleep in a cold, wet trench 10 feet under the ground, knowing full well that the other side could send somebody to drop some kind of explosive device on you while you're sleeping, and you're sleeping in a wet, rainy, muddy experience that's cold anyway in the fields of France. It could get cold in the night. And then on top of that, you got to worry about some bloke coming through cutting up the fences. So you can see that the wirer's job was a really important one, to go back and to repair the wire. Of course, if you're a wirer, you're a below the ground or above the ground. They're by definition above the ground. What's dangerous about this job? Yeah, right. You obviously, marksmen, sharpshooters are going to look through their monocular to try to find their scope, to try to find anybody that would come up off of the ground. And so often what they would do is they would raise things out of the ground to see if there was a sniper for the day, and and as soon as the helmet came up off the ground on a stick or whatever, if a bullet went through the helmet, then you knew somebody was there. Then there was this question about how to scout out. Of course, the German snipers were really smart at not letting you always know, so that as it came up out of the ground, so on and so forth, right? Let's take a look now at the voice of this one. Let's talk about how this poem is going to look at the war's horrors. It's going to take you back immediately into the experience of waiting out a battlefield night. Okay? For example, watching with bated breath as the fence menders risk almost certain death. I mean, if you got on this patrol to go up there to work on fixing the fences, there was real good likelihood that somebody was going to put a bullet in you, and probably more than one. Remember, this is the first war, where it's machine gun fire can just be sprayed across a certain area. Now, all you got to do is set up 25 or 30 machine gunners, and you can just spray across a field, and there ain't nobody that's going to make it to the other side, right? I mean, it's just there's too many bullets that can be fired too quickly, right? The wirers. Notice, pass it along. The wirers' party's going out. And yawning sentries mumble, wirers going out. Unraveling, twisting, hammering stakes with muffled thud, they toil with stealthy haste and anger in their blood. The bow sends up a flare, black forms stand rigid there, stock still like posts, then darkness, and the clumsy ghosts stride hither and thither, whispering, tripped by clutching snare of snags and tangles, ghastly, drawn with vaporous coasts, gleams desolate along the sky, night's misery ended. Young Hughes was badly hit. I heard him carried away, moaning at every lurch. No doubt he'll die today. But we can say the front line's wires been safely mended. Now, there's two things we want to say about this poem, and of course Anthem for Doomed Youth as well, the Wilfred Owen poem, classic. We're talking about a time of no internet. We're talking about a time of no TV video. We're talking about a time when journalists didn't go to the war. So in other words, kids would leave and go off to the war, and then slowly information would trickle back about what was happening at the war. One of the key ways that people found out about the war was through the poems that were written after the fact. This poem is an attempt to try to take a snapshot of what one evening in that war would be like. Number two, what do you make of the fact that young Hughes is mentioned? And what's the tone of the voice in the poem about Hughes? Notice we begin with voices, we end with voices. The beginning of the voices is, uh-oh, some poor blokes are going out. It would be just like this. The commander would come in and say, hey, this evening, Hernandez, Schaefer, Bryant, you're going up. You got 3 hours and then you're going up. And of course, Logue didn't get called, so Logue goes, oh. And on one hand, Logue would be like, whew. But on the other hand, those three blokes are his pals. He's grown close to them. And so Logue's like, oh, I'm glad I didn't get called up. But there's a 80% chance Hernandez ain't coming back tomorrow. They're going to put a bullet in him. So the 3 hours before they go up, what kind of conversations do they have? See, that's the first part of the poem, right? Uh-oh, they're going up, they're going up. Of course, Hughes here will represent what? Notice the adjective young. Did you see it? What does it mean, young Hughes? What do you want to make about that one? Young Hughes means what? Yeah, he was way too young to go, right? Way too young to go. Speaking of youth, let's go now to our last poem on 1277, Anthem for Doomed Youth. This is a very, very famous poem. It's going to capture in many ways the sad despair of battlefield death that undergoes no loving rituals, peacetime mourning, none of that. Right? Notice how this poem will continue to convey a certain kind of cynicism about the war. Anthem for Doomed Youth. I've had students that say, dude, it's harder to play my Call of Duty, for example, after I've read a couple of these poems. It's like the game makes somehow the war more like a game itself. But these poems make it less about a game and more about real life, which is, of course, what it was. Notice it's an anthem or a song for doomed youth. What does doomed mean? Yeah, guys, one whirling every day for 4 years. Whoa. And nobody gets to have this normal kind of experience of you die, people come and get together and we talk about you and then we bury you in this really graceful... No, none of that. In one moment you're there, the next moment you're not. Take a look. What passing bells for these who die is cattle. Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries for them from prayers or bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells and bugles calling for them from sad shires. What candles may be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds. Notice this poem plays two games. Stanza 1, the battlefield, where young men go up out of the trenches to take bullets and to die by the thousands and tens of thousands. I keep reiterating it because, as Mr. Bryant pointed out for us, the statistics are staggering here, right? a whirling every day. Whoa, 5,000 plus die every day for 4 long years. Who's going to light the candles for them? That is to say, perform the funeral rites, etc. Notice the second stanza, though, takes us away from the battlefield. Where will blinds be? Like what's on my window. Where will blinds be? You don't have blinds in the war. What are we talking about? Right. For example, if we sent Hernandez and Schaefer and Bryant up to do their job, all 3 of them represent people back home who are living far, far away, but every night, of course, pray only one thing. What is that? Right, for their safety. Maybe they'll come home, right? Of course, during this time, it's not like really quickly anyone back home is going to find out. Where's my? Like I said, it's not like today where you can pick up a phone and, for example, call somebody. No. This is going to be a situation where it's altogether possible years after the war. The question will still be, what happened to some of our loved ones? Were they captured? Were they put inside of some kind of internment camp? Were they killed in battle? How were they killed in battle? What happened to them? What does it mean that the slow dusk and the drawing down of blinds? What does that even mean? Every evening as night comes on, one more day. What would it be like to be the person back home that says, if 5,000 are dying every day for 4 years, what are the odds that my kid made it one more day? It's like I had a student who said, okay, that question right there makes it that much more difficult for me to fire up my game now and to play kill guys in wartime. Think about that question. Wrap your brain around that question. If 5,000 people are going to die every day for 4 years, every day for 4 years, and you're the one left back home, the question for you is, did my kid make it for one more day? And even if he did, I still got years of this. What's brutal about the First World War is that everybody thought it would be over in a month. No kidding. No kidding. Everyone thought, dude, it'll be over in a month. We'll completely annihilate them with all of our technology and they'll completely surrender. But guess what? The other side had technology too. In one day, for example, you could knock off 30,000, 40,000 people in one day, right? By number of explosives or the like. Of course, the use of special kinds of gases during this war made it even more horrific, right? Mustard gas. Gases that were outlawed in the Second World War were used in this First World War. Okay, 3B observations and we'll finish. How do you respond to these kinds of poems and the whole notion of death and dying during war? Is war and the dying in wartime an honorable thing? How do you respond to that? And why is it the case, do you think, so often that generations to follow forget the sacrifices of generations before? Right? Why is that? Why is it so easy to forget? Some of you didn't realize that in 4 years during the First World War, 5,000 people a day died. That statistic now, you go, whoa. But obvious question, dude, you've been in school for 12 years. You did worksheets on the world wars. How could this be news to you? How can we forget so easily and so quickly the death of so many? It's a fair question. And of course, let's not forget, as I give this lecture, 2 things. One, I've given this lecture to lots and lots of young men and women who sat right where you're sitting, who went on to fight for our nation, and still are. Right? Some of them didn't imagine they would be there. And then they were there. Which begs a really intriguing question. What about those people that are now there, right now? They're in Afghanistan right now. Last night they lived this experience that we're talking about, of wondering whether they were going to come home. As did the people who sent them there from those homes, right? Their moms, their dads, their grandmas, their grandpas, their brothers, their sisters. It does make you think differently the next time you have to stand at attention when the national anthem is played or sang. Would you agree with me? Let's go ahead and make that observation in 3B. Maybe that for you is the thing you take away from this experience, right? The saying of the Pledge of Allegiance has a different meaning when you look at it from this perspective. Thank you.